Jesus told us that there's only one God, and that God is Yahweh, and that there is no other God. That's his revelation to us. Jesus reveals that any other God other than Yahweh is an idol and is not a true God. Now, this is very exclusive, and that's where we baby boomers get real uncomfortable. And the younger generations who have been influenced by us baby boomers, is that it's exclusive. The only, what did I just say? The only pathway to God is through Jesus. Jesus said in John 14, verse 6, I am the way and the truth. Now, he didn't say I am a way. I am a truth. I am a life. He says, I am the way, which makes it specific. I am the way, I am, and the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. Now, who said that? Jesus said that. I didn't say it. Your mama and daddy didn't say it. Some preacher didn't say it. Jesus said it. And if you believe Jesus, then you have to reject all the other religious leaders. And this is what makes Christianity, that's the reason as Christians, as I look at America especially, we've slipped off of this thing. And partly because maybe we've gone out and we've been arrogant with people and hateful with people about what we believe and what they believe. We shouldn't ever be that way. We should be caring and loving, but we need to help people understand if Jesus is real, if Jesus is true, then every other religious belief is wrong. I'm not saying that as a preacher. I'm saying that's what Jesus says. If you believe in Jesus, you have to reject all other religious leaders. And it doesn't matter what anybody else says about it. There are many opinions and many views out there. But if Jesus is who he said he is, the very Son of God, then your parents' view, your preacher's view, some religious leaders' views, or anyone else's views don't matter. The only one's view that matters is Jesus. Because Jesus matters, his view matters if he's really the Son of God. So why does his view matter? Because he's the only person in history who died and brought himself back to life. I don't know anybody else that's done that. Do you? In all of history, Jesus is the only one who died, and 3 days later, he was dead for 3 days, brought himself back to life. So the issue of whether Allah is God or are there all the multitudes of gods of Hinduism, it all depends on, was Jesus telling the truth or was Jesus a liar? He wasn't a liar. How do I know? Because he brought himself back to life. People that do that are not going to deceive us. So the issue is Jesus credible? Is Jesus telling us the truth or not? That's really the issue. It comes down to that. You're here today because, I hope, because you believe Jesus was telling the truth. If Jesus is credible, How many of you believe Jesus is credible? Okay, I'm glad you raised your hand. You kind of had to, didn't you? But if Jesus is credible, then there's only one God. And the scripture gave us his name. His name is Yahweh. I know there's other ways, Jehovah and stuff like that, but in Hebrew, his name is Yahweh. YHWH. The original Hebrew only had consonants. They didn't have the vowels. So Yahweh is the best pronunciation. If Jesus is credible, there is no other God but Yahweh. If Jesus is credible, there are no multiple pathways to God. Did you hear that? In the text I read to you, no one comes to the Father but through me. So can a person get to the Father through Muhammad? According to Jesus, it's not my opinion here. My opinion doesn't matter. Jesus says there's no other way to the Father. No one comes to the Father but through me. If that's true, and we believe it is, why do we believe it is? Because he was the only one resurrected from the dead. Then all these other religions and all these other ways to God are false. If Jesus is credible, then the pathway to God is small, limited, narrow, exclusive. If Jesus is credible. I know we don't like this, and I know that for since the 60s when I was a hippie and I talked about, when we talked about religion, everybody's right, everybody's okay, there's multiple ways to get to God. You get to God on your way, you get to God your way, I get to God on my way. All of that was nonsense if Jesus is credible. And I know we don't like it. I don't like it, but it's true. Jesus, and it doesn't matter whether I like it or not. If Jesus religion is narrow-minded. How many of you want to be narrow-minded? No, we don't want to. But if you nobody raised their hand. So one. But if you want to follow Jesus, go ahead. Be narrow-minded about religion. I don't like that because it just goes against my grain. But it doesn't matter whether I like it or not. Truth is truth. It's Jesus' mind and not mine. Jesus' religion is exclusive. If Jesus is not credible, then there could be multiple gods. If Jesus is not credible, there could be multiple pathways to God if there's a God. If Jesus is not credible, then Allah and Yahweh are the same person. I've heard that. I had personal conversation, long, in-depth conversation with the leading uh, Muslim theologian here in Oklahoma City. And his argument is that because Islam is a branch off of Judaism, what he believes, and Christianity, that Judaism and Christianity are older versions of Islam, that Allah and God are the same God. And he was pretty convincing, but I had to tell him, hey, Jesus disagrees with you. So, well, I believe Jesus was a prophet. And I said, well, do prophets lie? No, if they lie, they're not truly a prophet of God. So you believe he's a prophet of God? Yeah, he said that Yahweh's the only God. You can't have it both ways. If Jesus is not credible, then it's possible that no religion is true. Or it's possible that there's not even a God. If Jesus is not credible, there is no way you can know which one is true and which one is false. Because all of those views come from people who are in their graves today and their flesh is rotted off their bones. And their opinions, they were their opinions just like it's my opinion. And opinions just don't matter. And the only one who's not in his grave and rotting today is Jesus. And he says there's one way. And if he was raised from the dead, then he is who he said he is. And so I'm going to be talking about that the next 2 weeks. And Lewis is recording these lessons. They'll be posted on YouTube, on the website, on YouTube at Bethany Church of Christ, Oklahoma. Bethany Church of Christ, Oklahoma, and these lessons will be on there. And if you have a friend who is a non-believer or whatever that should hear these lessons, and plug him in. Can we really believe what the Bible says about Jesus? It all comes down to just that. Was the man Jesus killed on a cross, on a Roman cross, killed, dead, and came back to life 3 days later? That's the issue. If he was, then Christianity and everything that says in the New Testament about him is true. If he wasn't, then we don't have a clue. Muhammad was a great leader, but he didn't resurrect from the dead. His body is still in his grave and rotting off the bones. Buddha was probably a great man. From what I've read, he was, but he did not resurrect from the dead. He's still in his grave. Joseph Smith was a great leader, but he was not raised from the dead. He's still in his tomb. Confucius was a great thinker, but he was not raised from the dead. He's still in his grave. All these men were great leaders and thinkers, but they were not raised from the dead. They're still in their tombs. Only one man in history came back to life. And that's why we're here today. If he didn't, then we're wasting our time here. So you better get it settled in your mind, not just because my mama believed it. You need to get it settled in your mind. Is this true? If Jesus is raised from the dead, then this is true. If he wasn't, then your guess is as good as mine. So what we have to do is determine, was Jesus credible? And it's not about our opinions. Do I believe Jesus was credible? And if he was credible, then there's only one God named Yahweh. If he was credible, then he was revealed, Yahweh was revealed through the pages of what we call the Bible. And that the only way to get to God, Yahweh, is through his son Jesus, the Messiah, or Christ. Word Messiah and Christ are the same word, one Hebrew, one Greek. If Jesus is credible. So that's going to be the next lessons. How do we know that Jesus is credible? And I'm going to share, before we run out of time, I'm going to share the basic important facts. And the reason I call them facts is I'll explain that. How do I know? How do I know that the Bible is true? How do I know that what the New Testament says is true? And this is the most important point, I think. It's not going to sound like it, but I've had many discussions, many debates with atheists, many debates with other religious leaders like Muslims, many religious debates, arguments with agnostics. And here's one of the most important points that has to be reckoned with. Number one, the Bible is historically accurate as a history book, and not as a religious book. Because people want to take the Bible and say, well, this is a religious book, so you can believe whatever you want to believe. No, it's not. It's not a religious book. It's a history book. It records events from history. And based on that, here's an important, and I'm telling you something that scholars know. Most of pew sitters don't know it. But scholars know that these are historical events that are recorded here. And so when you approach the New Testament, you have to approach it as a historical record, not as a religious book like, fairy tales. And so the first point is that all historians, how many? All historians, even atheist historians, believe the Bible is reliable history. Do you know that? I've had I've had discussions and I've read books. This has been my area of study for 50 years. And I've got a library full of books on this subject. And I've got books written by atheists, historians who do not believe in God. And they argue about events recorded in the New Testament. Well, the fact is they accept the record of the New Testament as accurate history. So why aren't they believers? Because they believe that the people who recorded the history understood it incorrectly. I've got a book called The Passover Plot. And the whole book argues that Jesus didn't really die, but he fainted, he swooned. He calls it the swoon theory. He kind of passed out, or he took a narcotic that made him appear dead. They thought he was dead. They took him down from the cross. They buried him, put him in the tomb, and 3 days later he revived and came out, and they all thought, oh, he's resurrected. And they started a new religion. But the point is, he doesn't disagree with the view that the New Testament says that Jesus lived, he was a real person, that he had a following of people, that he preached and taught, and they believed he healed people. The historian doesn't disagree with the idea that he was crucified by the Romans. The historian doesn't disagree that Jesus was buried in a tomb, and he doesn't disagree that he came back and appeared to people 3 days later. Now, where does he get that information? It's not recorded anywhere but in the New Testament. So what does that mean? That means that this atheist historian has to accept the writings of the New Testament as history. They don't, if they could deny that it was history, that would be it. They go, that's not history. But they can't do that. They have to accept the New Testament as historically accurate. They don't want to do it, but they have to. They would be laughed out of their profession as historians if they tried to deny it. And so, whenever I discuss with somebody, and I've had many discussions with intelligent people, professors, atheists who would argue that that Christianity is a fabrication, I go to the New Testament and we really thrash through it. He said, well, he didn't really, that was a popular view about 40 years ago of the swoon theory. And they said, well, he just passed out. They thought he was dead. Really? So how do you explain the spear stab in the side? How do you explain the fact that the Romans were professional executioners? You don't think they knew the guy was dead? Well, that didn't really happen. Well, do you believe he was crucified? Yeah. where do you get that? Well, it says right there he was crucified. So does it say he was stabbed? Yeah, but that didn't really happen. I said, so what? You think this little piece is correct and this little piece isn't? The New Testament really, what people don't realize is the New Testament that we have right here, the New Testament, is the best history in all the world, the best history we have from that period of time. And that's not my view. That's intellectual view. That's scholarly view. That there is no historical recordings as superior from that period of time, the first century. There are no other historical recordings as superior, that is superior to the New Testament. It's the best historical record we have from that period of time. And so all historians have to accept it, whether they want to or not. The atheists don't want to accept it, but they have to. So for 2,000 years, atheists have been trying to reject it, and they can't. And that's where you and I can begin. If you ever have conversation with somebody, if you have somebody in your family who's an unbeliever, and you can open the conversation without getting into a fight or without problems, just, why don't you believe in what the Bible says about Jesus? And then all you got, because most of, I have a nephew one time that argued with me. Well, I believe Jesus didn't really exist. Really? You're terribly uninformed. Now, I don't say you're stupid or ignorant or moron. That doesn't get you anywhere. But I'd say you're uninformed. Let me encourage you to pick up an encyclopedia, any encyclopedia, Britannica, Americana, whatever. Look up Jesus and see why they have an article in there about Jesus. And do they refer to him as a myth or as a historical person? Do you think Britannica is a religious book? No. Look, see what it says. You see, it's so important that we understand that you and I, just like any scholar, can go to the historical record and read it for ourselves. And what you're reading is actual history. It's the best history we have from that period of time. The bottom line is something huge happened in the first century in the land of Israel that changed the whole world. Something happened. No scholar who's aware. Now, you can talk to people who just don't know, they're uninformed. But scholars know something big happened. Something, it's like I've used this illustration before. You're sitting on a creek or at a pond. You can't see all the pond because of trees. You're sitting there, and all of a sudden, huge ripples come rolling by. Well, what are you going to conclude? Something caused those ripples. Ripples don't just happen. Well, something happened in the first century that sent ripples, a shock wave, through the entire world. And people who ignore that are just, they're denying their own ability to think. You got to say, what caused that? Something big enough to cause a shock wave happened in the first century in the land of Israel. What was it? Here are things that they can't refuse. That the man Jesus began with a group of followers and with 12 apostles. Can't be refused. That it was reported that the man Jesus worked miracles. And it was even reported by the authorities who opposed him that he worked miracles. That he was crucified by the Romans, and the Romans pronounced him dead. Number 5, he was buried in a known tomb according to the custom of the Jews. That's important because I've had people try to argue, well, they went to the wrong tomb. No, they knew what tomb it was. And he was buried according to the custom of the Jews, which explains the shroud. And I'm going to show you the shroud of Turin uh, in a couple of weeks. I'm not going to have it here. It's going to be on. Number 6, that on the third day his followers claimed that he was raised from the dead, and many witnesses said they saw him alive and even spent time with him and ate with him. 7, that those witnesses were threatened with death if they continued their claim that they saw him alive. Number 8, that most of the witnesses were killed for their preaching that he was raised from the dead, but they never denied their claim to have seen Jesus after he was crucified and buried. They died for their testimony. That's a fact. 9, tens of thousands of Jews in the city of Jerusalem in just a few short years believed the testimony of the preaching and became followers of Jesus because they believed he was resurrected from the dead. And they were persecuted for their belief. They lost their homes, their property, their income, and some of them their lives. Number 10, that within a few years, the belief that Jesus was raised from the dead was believed all over the known world. All of these points, this is so important, all of these points, all historians, even atheist historians, believe those points to be true. Now, what they try to do is show that it was a non-miraculous thing that happened and that the witnesses thought it was miraculous, which puts them in a terrible bind. Okay, so come the next 2 weeks, we'll explore this in depth. I hope you're a believer in Jesus. I believe that you're here because you're a believer in Jesus. Jesus, after his resurrection, appeared to the disciples, and just before he was caught up into heaven, he says, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to the whole creation. And whoever believes and is baptized shall be saved." Well, can we believe that? Can we believe what he said? If he's credible, you can. If he was raised from the dead, he has the right to say that. So if you believe that and get baptized, will you be saved? He said you will. Let's have an invitation song.